know what I mean?
One of us does.
See all guys who were arrested. You slept well, you ate well. You ever got a chance to sleep? If you didn't get a chance to sleep, I'm sure your servants didn't get a chance to sleep either.
We're in separate rooms.
Don't worry. Tonight, I'm sure you're going to be very tired. You're all going to fall asleep extra early. Just one advice for the servants, Red Bull. Red Bull.
Red Bull?
For our servants.
They're in a different room.
To keep up.
Yeah,
So,
you're in the room.
yesterday we talked a little bit about how different people try to take different roads up the mountain. Everybody's saying, you know what, it's pretty much all the same. Today I want to give you a practical example of different roads that people have tried to take, but it didn't really get them far or far enough. This morning I'll talk to you about science and Christianity. Not what science is all about, what science really does, and all that stuff. I'm going to focus on a different aspect of it. Modern science takes root, modern science we know it today, takes root in 17th century Europe. Whether experimentation, verification, falsification, you come up with a hypothesis or a theory, you set up an experiment or an observation, some sort of method of testing, and then it's either validated or falsified, and you go back and you readjust the theory a little bit, okay? And each time you go through that cycle, the theory or the hypothesis gets a little bit stronger. Or if it's no good, gets a little bit weaker and eventually is discarded, right? Why is Central Europe a special place where modern science took root? Why not China? Or why not Australia? Why not anywhere else? Why Europe? You raise your hand first. It's okay.
I mistake China for Japan because Japan is like, you know what?
That's okay. Why not Japan? Why Europe specifically?
Because Europe.
You want to think about it and we'll come back to it? Okay, you are the second one after.
No, it's because like around that time,
Yeah?
the people in Europe like started to question, to like you know. So no, it's not.
You didn't say anything.
No.
Yeah, so they started to experiment, and then
They started to question.
yeah, they started to question. They started to question basically everything.
This one, okay, do you know what that was called? 17th, 18th century in Europe?
Questioning everything.
Questionation.
Falsification.
That's actually a good enough name. They're called the Enlightenment, right? And the Enlightenment was all about pursuing the truth through science. Okay? Before then, it was just through the church. And the church would tell you how the world runs and what you need to do to be saved and all that stuff, right? But then, beginning with Galileo and Newton and all these people, and eventually picking up steam with all the scientific discoveries that people are beginning to do, they started to see another way to the truth, away from the church. At the time, the Roman Catholic Church was really empowered in Europe. But so the reason is not that Europeans are smarter than everybody else. The reason was that Europe was soaked in Christianity. Okay? Even though the Catholic Church was really enforcing rules by force, essentially, but the Christian worldview, the Christian mindset, the Christian faith was all over Europe. And that's why modern science came from that region. It didn't come from anywhere else. Most working scientists seldom think about the presuppositions undergirding their work. You know what presuppositions mean? Okay, like for example, you go on to the end of the hall. There's an elevator. You push the button, right? The door opens, and you get in. Okay. You push the button to the 2nd floor, to the 10th floor, whatever floor you want, and it takes you up there. Yeah, you open the door, you go up there, and you go wherever place you need to go. What are the presuppositions that maybe some stuff you didn't think about? The presuppositions like kind of like an assumption.
How much floor is there?
Okay, you assume maybe that there is somewhere some sort of person, maybe an engineer, looked at the physics of the elevator and what was required, how strong it has to be, maybe how many people are going to be in the elevator. You just walk in there, you don't really think about it, right? You know, you push the button, it goes up there, right? And that's it. You go to the airport, get on an airplane, worried about what? Where I'm going to sit, where's my iPod, where's the iPad, the movie, where's my headphones, I forgot my headphones, it's a disaster, that's all I'm thinking about, right? But the really important stuff like, is this plane really safe? Is this plane able to take off and land safely? No. These are the presuppositions, and sometimes you don't even think about it. And there are such things in science. And sometimes, actually many times, scientists don't even think about it. They take these things for granted and they just focus on the work. Sometimes you want, it's scary, right? To think about, really, did they do the work? Is what I'm doing or the decisions I'm making, are they built on a solid foundation? So Charles Hummel is, you can call him a science historian. Most working scientists seldom think about the presuppositions undergirding their work. There are certain philosophical principles shared by members of the scientific community are almost articles of faith, without which there would be no community. There are certain presuppositions that science is built on. Okay? Some of these might seem like obvious to you, right? Like, duh. Like, the world is real. Does that seem like something like should be, I don't know, in question? Right? The world is objectively real. The world has a beginning with a linear progression of history. Okay? The world specifically was created out of nothing. And believe it or not, that whole idea of the world having a beginning was described by the Bible. How God created, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And we're going to talk a little bit about this later on today. But in the Bible, we see so many passages that talk about creation. Not just Genesis chapters 1 and 2. There are many, many other verses in the Bible that talk, and passages that talk about creation. And they describe how the world had a beginning. And for centuries, people said what? No. The universe is eternal. It goes infinite in the past and infinite in the future. It's eternal. The Bible will say no, the world had a beginning. And just very recently, in the 20th century, people or scientists have started to catch up with this idea. But all along, Christianity would say no, the world has a beginning. Yes.
When God created the earth, did it take a long time, or was it
No, let him
7 days in God's time.
Let him finish. But let him finish the question. We agreed yesterday that when someone's asking a question, they get our full attention and respect. So, please. You have to be respectful to them as well. Okay, so can you state your question again, but clearly now?
Like, how long did it take for God to create earth?
How long? Okay, so this is a very good question. Do you mind that I answer this question at the end? But you have to remind me again.
Okay.
It's going to take us on a tangent. We don't want to lose spot in the presentation. Well, we're going to discuss. If it's about that specific question, we'll talk about it at the end. But don't forget it. Don't let me forget that. The creation reflects the rational nature of the Creator. Okay? There is rationality, there's an order to the world. There are laws. Okay? Not laws enforced by governments. No, there are physical laws. Okay? Sometimes you wake up in the morning, you get out of bed, and you float to the ceiling.
What?
No, that is not. We're saying that there is no, this doesn't happen. Does it ever happen to you?
One time.
One time by your dream, right? Then you wake up and you're like, oh, it was a dream. But in reality, the world has laws. It's order. And that order, that rationality reflects the rationality of the Creator, right? If it was a crazy person doing a crazy thing, the work would show craziness. But if it was a smart person doing something, doing a work, it would show their intelligence.
Usually the smart people are considered crazy.
Is usually what?
Usually the smart people are considered crazy.
Yes. The creation reflects the rational nature of the Creator. The heavens, remember the psalm we were reading this morning? The psalm of the liturgy? Anybody remember? What the deacon that was reading it? Psalm 19. Yes, the heavens declare the glory of God. We're going to talk a little bit about that this afternoon. And finally, human beings are unique in the sense that they're capable of reasoning and discovering the order of creation. They're capable of reasoning, rationality, and not just that, discovering what the world is about. You don't see any other kind of animal doing research and seeing what kind of world we really live in, and how the stars work, and how elements work, and how physics work, and particles, and all that stuff. No, it's just humans, because human beings are not only different in degree, we're different in kind. Different in kind. The world would want to say, no, human beings are different in degree. They're like apes, but smarter. Okay? But we're different in kind. Okay? We have things that other creatures do not have. It's not just that we have things that they have, but more of it. No, we're different in kind. Science was still born in other great civilizations outside Europe because of prevailing ideas that stifle scientific development. And that's what I'm saying. In Europe, science was able to thrive, was able to become dominant, viable, was able to continue because of Christianity. Other civilizations, other faiths, other religions had science and had scientific discoveries. They were very smart, but they couldn't continue because there was no Christianity. And I'm going to show you some examples. Yes, it's French. Remember how we're talking about the history is linear? Some people think that history is not linear, it's cyclical. Okay? It's cyclical. So it comes around and it repeats every few 100 years, billion years, or every certain amount of years. It repeats again. Some people think that the universe itself is they call it the oscillating model of the universe. There's a big bang followed by a big crunch. Big bang followed by big crunch. Big bang followed by a big crunch. It goes on and on and on and on and on, right? And it's oscillating and it's cyclical. Okay? The Hindu view of history follows this. Okay? That history is cyclical. It promotes, of course, complacency, provides no basis for cause and effect, because history just keeps going back over and over again. So there's no relation between cause and effect. And if there's no relation between cause and effect, there's no reason for me to study what the cause of this effect is, because there's no relation. Okay? And there's no reason for scientific development. Pseudoscientific explanations for natural phenomena. Big fancy words. Can you give me an example of that? Pseudoscientific explanations of natural phenomena. It's stuff that's printed in the newspaper every day.
Lies.
What's a newspaper? What's a newspaper? What's printing? Horoscope, thank you. Astrology. Astrology, right? Astrology is an example of this. Saying, oh, this happened because of the stars. You see, this star was aligned with that star, and that's exactly why you fell and scripted. Okay. Pseudo-scientific explanation for natural phenomena. Did you? Deification of nature. Okay. Deification of nature meaning that everything in nature, like trees, rocks, mountains, crocodiles, everything has some sort of deity, some sort of spirit or God in it. Okay. So there's the God of the Nile. There is the God of the pyramids. There's the God of the desert. There is the God of the parking lot. The deification of. Okay. This is called animism, where we get the word animated from. Animism. And even till today, people believe that pantheism, which we talked about a little bit yesterday, that the universe itself is alive. Denial of the existence or orderliness of the world. The world really doesn't exist. And some Eastern religions believe that the world is all an illusion. It's not really real. This is all an illusion. Okay? Sorry? Say that again? Say your question again. Are you saying a question? Okay. Next, imbalance between faith and reason. Some cultures relied too much on faith, and because of this, they fell into problems with mysticism. Okay? Don't understand something? It's all mysticism and magic and things like that. That's where this kind of stuff comes from. Other cultures fall into imbalance towards reason, no faith. And cultures like that come out with things like naturalism and atheism and so forth. Okay, so there's an imbalance between the two. The Greeks, for example, were very much towards reason, right? And we're going to talk specifically about them later on. Humanity is seen as different, like I said before, in degree, not in kind. In degree and not in kind. Okay? So this brings serious questions into play. Where does the rationality of man come from? Where does your consciousness come from? Your memory, your ability to reason, your ability to discern, your ability to discover the world. Okay? Modern science was conceived, born, and flourished in the matrix of Christian theism. This is a Christian philosophy, contemporary. Only liberal doses of self-deception and doublethink, I believe, will permit it to flourish in the context of Darwinian naturalism. I'm going to give you some examples of some cultures where science was stillborn. Stillborn means it started, but it could not continue. Because they lacked all of these things that were found in Christianity. They didn't have it. The oldest is not this one, but Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia means really the land between the two rivers. It's a very ancient culture. They're very smart people. They had achievements in math, achievements in astronomy. They were able to track some stars. And remember, they didn't have like telescope, they didn't have instruments like we have today. So that's pretty good. So they couldn't continue scientifically because of what? Astronomy was mixed with astrology, the pseudo-scientific explanation of the natural phenomena. Everything to them was the stars. How the stars work and the stars and the movement of the stars and the alignment of the stars determine everything that happens here on Earth. So there was no point in pursuing scientific explanations or discoveries or research, right? Whatever you do doesn't matter. What do the stars say? India. The Hindus' Valley civilization is very old, also very smart. They have achievements in math. You're familiar with the Arabic numerals?
No.
Right? They borrowed it from the Indian. These guys came up with it first. Sorry? They borrowed it, yeah, and they gave it back. So, the stillbirth came as a result of Maya. Maya means that the world is not really real. It's not really objective. It's all an illusion. And if the world is an illusion, what's the point of studying the world? What's the point of testing things, discovering things? And of course, the cyclical nature of history. They believe that this is This is the way history runs. So what was the point of studying it? China. Achievements in astronomy, medicine, invented paper, prediction of earthquakes. Right? Only now maybe we're really trying to catch up with these ancient discoveries that they had. Also invented the fireworks. Very cool. But
But these flowers
stillbirth occurred as a result of the yin and the yang. Yin and yang is a Chinese philosophy that says basically there are opposing forces in nature that cancel each other, that balance each other. Okay? And in a sense, they cause each other to happen to keep or to maintain balance in nature. And if this is the case, then there's no reason to study nature. Because whatever cause you're studying is not permanent. Whatever cause you're studying is not valid or objective. Because some force is going to come from somewhere to cancel it out, to balance it. Egypt. Math, astronomy, food, tamia.
What?
What? Are you saying Egyptians didn't invent tamia? Is that what you're saying?
Tamaya, what now?
Tamia.
What's that?
What's that? Don't worry. We're gonna do some tamia for you, workshop, and show you how Egyptians do tamia. Workshop of tamia. Food. It's good food. I know. So the stillbirth occurred as a result of deification of nature. Okay? Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians had the idea that everything in nature had a god. They had many gods. They had the god of this and the god of that. Everything was controlled by a god and was working according to the will of that god. So why would you study nature if this god today feels like the sun should be going this way, tomorrow the sun is going that way? Okay? The day after, the sun might just fall out of the sky. It's all about deification of nature. And it didn't really help help science to continue or to thrive in Egypt.
This is the same Maya in Mexico?
No, we talked. That was in Indian religion. Maya means that the world is an illusion. There's a name for a river, right? Yeah. In Greece, yes.
Ancient Egyptians, they had achievements in science.
They had achievements, but they could not continue. All of these cultures had achievements, but they could not continue. And it was because of the lack of Christianity.
So once they believed that everything has a God, they stopped doing achievements in science.
Yes. Yeah. For them, this was an impediment to science. It did not allow science to continue, to thrive, right? Everything was controlled by the God that lives within that object, the God that lives within that creature or within that structure. Right? It's all about what that God wants for the God. So instead of studying how things really work, I offer this God a sacrifice. Okay? So that was an impediment to science. Not that they didn't have, they did have. And they had some things like the way they built the pyramids, the way they mummified. We still don't know how they did that exactly, right? Especially with the kind of tools that they had. But they could not continue this because of this. Math and logic, right? Plato, Aristotle, they had very smart people. The 5th century Greek philosophers came up with the theory of atoms. Okay? And it was just based on philosophy. They had no way of observing atoms, they had microscopes or anything like that. But they came up with the theory that said that the world is made of these small little particles. Okay? And these little particles, they're indestructible, essentially. And all things that we see are a result of these particles coming together, moving apart. And it sounds pretty cool. It sounds like pretty much what we think, with, of course, with some adjustment, but 5th century BC, 2,500 years ago, they knew about atoms and particles and things like particle physics. And it's very smart, right? What was their problem? Plato. Plato had this philosophy that the world is not really real. Or it's not real in the sense that, not in the same sense as Hindus, but he had the idea that there are two worlds. One world was the perfect world, the world of ideas, the world of forms. The world we live in is a copy of that. Okay? Is a copy of the perfect world, the world of ideals, the world of forms. And this is a copy that we live in. Plato also had this other philosophy of the denial of matter. Matter does not really exist. So even though they were very smart, very logical, they thought so much about that, about Aristotle taught about rhetoric and how to speak and how to persuade people, how to convince. Logically, they're very smart, but they couldn't continue their scientific discoveries because of these problems.
What's this?
And finally, the Islamic civilization. They also were smart. They had achievements in math. Like I said before, they borrowed the numbers. This didn't give them back, actually. This still happened. They didn't give them back to the Hindus. But some people say that all the discoveries that the Muslims had was as a result of assimilation. When they go to a new culture, a new city, or a new country, and they conquer them, they take all their discoveries, right? They take all of their smart people and they take all their ideas and they make them their own. But they themselves had very smart people. They had people who were reading Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Plato, and that was in the 10th and 11th and 12th century AD, while people in Europe were, in the Dark Ages. Okay? They were very smart. They couldn't continue. Why not? Allah, the Quran, which we talked a little bit about yesterday, is completely arbitrary. He does things that are unpredictable. He creates the good, creates the evil. You try to live your life in a way that the good outweighs the evil. Okay? But at the end, you still don't know. And it's always as Allah wills. Okay? We don't know what Allah's going to do. So why study nature if things are random, if they're not predictable? Allah can come and change things, and nobody can question, nobody can say anything. Many roads, but we saw that not all of them lead to the truth. Not all of them take you where you need to go. People who want to avoid confrontation, want to avoid discussion, want to avoid essentially thinking, say, you know what, all roads are the same. But clearly not. We talked yesterday about not all the roads are the same. And I showed you an example, a practical example of really, not all the roads work out. In real life, it doesn't work out this way. Not all roads are the same. So next time somebody asks you a question and says, is Christianity really the only way? Way to? Thank you very much. So now I'll take some questions. So questions. You have a question?
So how long did it take for God to, like their...
Okay, so Genesis 1 and 2, it talks about the 6 days of creation, okay? 6 days of creation. Yeah, this is not, right, I'm not saying anything new, right? It talks about the first day, second, third day, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And then Genesis 2 talks about the 7th day and how God rests, okay? So I'm going to read to you from Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and show you that the use of the word day, you have a comment on this question, right? So comment, go ahead, comment while I get it.
Okay, the Bible says it's like, okay, you don't have to do that. It's approximately 7 days, approximately, like if you count the resting day. But there was no time exact measure thing back then, so it could have been like 1 billion years each day. But it's not actually 1 billion years.
So can I ask you, what do you mean there wasn't an exact measure back then?
She means Pascal.
Hold on, let her finish. Let her finish. Go ahead.
There wasn't like hours or minutes and stuff, so it could have lasted.
Why wasn't there hours and minutes?
It's Pascal didn't make a clock.
No, it's a clock was made to keep time. Okay, to tell you how much time has passed. But that doesn't mean that time didn't exist until you have a watch to see how much time has passed.
So it could have been just exactly a day.
He didn't create.
say it louder so I can all hear?
God didn't abide by time. He had like no past, present, or future. He's just there.
Okay. So God didn't abide by time. Okay, very good.
I think time existed, obviously, and God created laws and follows the same laws He created. When the Bible expressed them in terms of days, He did not specifically mean 24 hours. He meant, the Bible meant, a certain period of time that can be very long or very short, depends on what it is. And the Bible, as far as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, that the Bible was talking about this in the context of talking about this, the relationship between God and man, did not intend to be a scientific book to speak about scientific, facts, even though the Bible did not was not ignoring or not ignorant of scientific.
Okay, well, I thought about this thing. And I thought about it, and maybe God wasn't actually using like time, but He was using like the sun and moon as days. Because they like.
So what day was the sun?
Yeah, on the first day.
What day was the sun and moon created?
The first.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Second.
Second.
Third. Fourth.
Lights. I don't know what that is.
Okay, I see there's a lot of confusion. So, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And there are many other verses in the Bible that talk not just about the beginning of space, but also the beginning of time itself. Okay? Einstein's theory of general relativity talks about how space-time had a beginning. And not only had a beginning, but since that beginning, it began and it continued and it continues to expand. Okay? So when the Bible talks about in the beginning, it was really the beginning of space and time. God was outside of space and outside time. Okay? He created space and time. He wasn't working within space and time, He created. And I know this is kind of like a difficult concept. But the question, we'll go back to the original question, is how long did that take? Okay? And first and second Genesis talk about the 6 days of creation plus one more as a day of rest. And I'm going to show you from the first and second chapters of Genesis that there are actually in the words themselves, the literal meanings, there is more than one meaning for the word day, which tells us that we have to be careful when we're looking at those words. Does it mean actual 24-hour periods? Does it mean long periods of time? What does it mean exactly? Okay, so I'm going to give you some explanations, some examples, but I want you to count. Okay? So the first one, the first time God mentions the word day. God called the light, this is in verse 5. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. Okay? What does that mean? God called the light day. How long is that word day? What does it refer to? Refers to day, daylight, right? How long is daylight? Right? Depends, yeah, it's around 12 hours, right? Okay, so that's the first literal meaning. It's daylight. Okay? So the evening and the morning were the first day. That's the second meaning. A day. Okay? Good. The third meaning. We go to Genesis chapter 2. He said that and on the seventh day God ended His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done. So it doesn't say that the seventh day had an end. It just says that the seventh day, and everybody agrees with it, the seventh day only had a beginning. All the other days had a beginning and an end. This one, just a beginning. So it's a really, really long period of time. And then finally, sorry? In the seventh day, that's right. Because there's no end, didn't end yet. And finally, in verse 4, chapter 2, verse 4, this is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created. in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. You know when you say back in the day when I was your age, right? I didn't wear shorts, something like that. So that would be kind of silly to say, you know what day was that? Monday? Was it Tuesday? Doesn't make sense. Because that meaning from the words themselves, the literal meaning has more than one meaning. So when we say the word day, what does it mean? Does it mean 24 hours?
No.
Does it mean more than 24 hours? Does it mean that we should take into account all the different verses or all the different passages in the Bible about creation? Right? So let me finish. You asked the question, so let me finish and don't interrupt. Okay? So we have to see all of the different verses and what exactly they say. And if we say that one meaning is right, and this is exactly what it means, we have to be able to support that, not only from with that verse, but from all the other verses. Okay? So for God to create, did He need 6 days? Did He need 6 days?
No.
He did not need 6 days. And all He needs to do is say, let it be, and it can be. This is our God. This is the God that's all powerful. Why would He create on 6 days? Why would it take so many years and so many until people are born? Why, for example, are we born as infants and we grow day by day? Why do we need to work hard to go to school, to study, to earn a degree? Why not just create people who are perfect, we're all PhDs, we all know everything, and there's nothing to learn, and we just live? Why does God create things that would grow, that would change over time?
Like no point.
Yes, that's part of the answer. The answer is that this is the purpose. This is the purpose of God's creation. The purpose of God's creation is to prepare us for the next life. That is the purpose. God is not creating a robot and then takes that robot and puts it in a different box. Right? God creates a person who that person has weaknesses and has strength and has freedom, has free will, right? And He creates that person capable of exercising that free will in an environment that gives that person the ability to exercise that free will. If that environment is perfect, right? If that environment is perfect now, everything is done now, everything is prepared now, and that person's free will is really, there's no point to it. What's the point of choosing A or B? Oh, it's done. It doesn't matter if I choose A or if I choose B, everything is done, everything is perfect. So my free will is essentially invalid. Yeah, it's there, but it's useless. I can't even exercise it. I can't do anything with it. God creates us in a way that we need to grow. We need to work hard to grow, to mature. And same thing with His creation, same thing with the world. So how long did it take? 24-hour periods? It took a long period of time. A long period of time for things to settle and things to grow. And God created these things in a specific order, so that the world is as we see it today.
Does this apply to, in God's eye, one day is 1,000 years and 1,000 years?
That's right. If we say that it is 24 hours, then where do we go from this verse? The verse that says, for God, a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is one day. Right? To God, His concept of time or His view of time is different than ours. You have to remember, we are under time. We're under the yoke of time. But God's above. Okay? So it's difficult sometimes to see how people really take the Bible and interpret it in a very literal, in a very kind of unique way that's not done the same way. We see how the fathers of the church, they wrote many books. St. Basil wrote on the 6 days of creation. St. John Chrysostom, Saint Irenaeus of Lyon from the 2nd century, he wrote on the 6 days of creation. They wrote a lot about these things, but they didn't take these verses out of context and say, okay, this is what it means, and everything was created last week. Right? They knew how God works and how He operates within His creation. Yes.
Does it say in the Bible where God said my times is like 1,000 years. Like.
Yes, this is a verse in the Bible. It said, to God, 1,000 years is one day, and 1 day is 1,000 years.
It's like 7,000.
It's in the Psalm, yes, in the book of Psalm.
And the 6 days creation is maybe thousands of years. We don't know.
Right? It's a very long period of time.
Abuna, is it fair to describe those 6 days of creation as rather than stages, rather than days? Like those are the 6 stages of creation? Like
That's a way of looking at it, yes. If you look at the 24-hour periods that we call a day now, the earth used to spin much faster. There were periods of time in the earth's history that it used to spin as fast as 10 and 12 hours. So the day was 12 hours, it wasn't 24. And it took time for it to slow down. To slow down enough so that human beings can live on there, so that life can live on there. So yes, there were different stages in creation. People ask, you know what? How can you not believe in evolution? There's so much evidence to it, right? How can you not believe in evolution? This was just posed usually as a general question. So it really depends on what people mean by the word evolution. When they say evolution is change over time. This is exactly what we believe. Change over time. And the Bible talks about change over time. And in the book of Genesis, it talks about 13 stages in those 6 days, like what you're saying. And they changed over time. And it gets them accurate. And it gets them in the right order. All of these steps and how things were created, what came first, what came next. And every day we find out more. This is really what happened. Any other questions?
Emily, where are you?
No.
So that answers your question? Yes. Or maybe somebody else has. Any other questions? Yes, thank you.
Why do you think that like the Muslims and the Islam's believe in Allah? Like, I heard it and it doesn't make any sense. Like he hates, like you said, that he hates people, and like my friend, she's Muslim, she has like extremely strict rules. Like she can't be extravagant. Like not like she just like farewell and she can't look like.
So modesty is very important to them.
Yeah, but like how come, like, why do you think they believe in that?
So why do Muslims believe? There are many reasons. Some people are born into Islam. Okay? Some people go into Islam because of tough situations. Like for example, in very poor places, Islam could be very poor places, Islam could be propagated using money and economics and stuff. Okay. And we've seen that happen in the past. Right? People come in and they give people money to convert and so forth. Some people do it under pressure. You have to understand that here in the West, the way we evaluate things is based on good and bad. If it's good, I do it. If it's bad, I don't do it. In the East, the Middle Eastern mindset is not like that. It's more about honor. So if something honorable, I will do it. If something dishonorable, I won't do it. You've heard in the news about people who have do honor killing of their daughter or something like that, right? You've heard about that, right? So you haven't heard about that. Okay, so that means that instead of the daughter bringing dishonor to her family, the father would have her killed. Okay? So that's I'm telling you. For them, the decision is not based on good or bad. It's based on honor and dishonor. When we think, to me, this is a no-brainer. If I was in that situation, I would choose A. Okay? But they're working with a different set of rules, different rule book. It's not about good or bad, honor and dishonor. So there are many reasons why people become Muslims. And there are many reasons people convert out of Islam. But people who are Muslim, they have a lot to lose. Not just by converting, but by even considering that the Quran is false. So for someone to even just consider that, for someone to start reading a Bible, to start reading any other religious book, or to read the Quran itself, to see if it's right or wrong, this is a very high risk for them. And once they make that decision and say, okay, I'm convinced that this is right, and I want to develop it further, I want to follow it further, this comes at a very high cost, because they stand to lose a lot. A Muslim person can lose what?
His life.
Their life. That would be the least thing that they could lose.
Their family.
Right? They could lose their family. Right? If it was just about their lives, they'd be more willing. But the shame, the guilt, losing their family. So when I give someone the one, I say, you know what? This is the truth. What you have is not the truth. He might agree with you.
Have you been
But it would not be just as simple as saying, I know this is right and I know this is wrong. I know there's so many things in here that don't make sense. But you know how much I stand to lose if I stop believing in this? I stand to lose my family, my friends, my community. Islam is not just a religion for a Muslim. It's part of their identity.
Like a lifestyle.
It's part of their identity, part of who you are, right? It's like your right hand, your left hand. And I say, how do you say lose that? It's very difficult to just think that I can wake up tomorrow and my father, my mother, who I love them, they love me their whole lives, all of a sudden disown me. It's a very difficult one.
Sorry, have you ever been in a situation where you have been approached by a Muslim person, or you were in a position of kind of preaching or talking about the faith to a Muslim? Not necessarily that a Muslim is something, but have you been?
Yes.
How did that go?
It depends, right? Sometimes I go usually to a lot of meetings in universities, and the university it's open, right?
Yeah.
You have people from all different kinds of faith, and atheists, and so forth. And sometimes Muslims come in and attend meetings, and usually the discussions that we have, the private discussions afterwards, these discussions are the more honest ones, where they open up more. So some of them are really willing to say, I'm willing to look more into these claims, right? But I'm scared. It's not easy. If I lose my family, will you be my family? It's not just about, okay, this is the truth. Okay, thank you, I'm going to go follow it now. But tomorrow I'm going to be alone. Are you going to come and be my family? Right? If I'm sick, if I'm sad, are you going to call and check up on me? So there are so many other things associated with this question. It's not just as simple as saying, this is what's true, this is what's right, you should follow it, and you should forsake everything else. But bit by bit, we see people finding the courage to exactly do that. Take that leap of faith. See, you know what? God will provide. I know He's never going to forsake. This is the true God. God will provide. And when they become Christian, they become such good and devout Christians that their faith is so strong because it's been tested. Their faith has been tested. They've been in a situation where they're scared. They don't know what's going to happen. Right? And their faith has, and we're not talking somewhere in the Middle East, we're talking here in the West. So their physical danger is not as much. It's not as high, definitely. But their faith has been tested, so you find their faith is so strong. Stronger even than people who are born and raised Christian. Some people are not willing at all to concede or to think even that the Quran is not true. Right? The whole thinking is that everybody else is misunderstanding the Quran. Everybody else is miswording the Quran. I gave you yesterday an example of a verse that was mistranslated.
There are so many verses.
Right? And there are so many other examples like that. The English translation is misrepresenting what the Arabic is actually saying. But even that,
intentionally though.
Even that,
yeah.
Right? We're not even talking about the intentions of the translators.
Yeah.
Even that, they're not willing to say or to consider that this is true. They're saying, no, you're not telling the truth. They don't speak Arabic, they don't know, but they say, you don't speak the truth, you're lying. So there are so many different kinds of people at different stages, and sometimes they're more willing, they're more open to the discussion, sometimes they're not. But at the same time, there are discussions, and this is a good thing. Of course, you know, in Toronto, there's more of it, more discussions, because just simply there's just more multicultural culturalism than places maybe like here or even a little bit in the West. It's more uniform. We have a lot of different cultures, so there's a lot of discussions. But for these discussions to be fruitful, we have to be prepared. We have to know what do we mean by Christianity? What do we mean by salvation? What is free will? What is the and the question, a lot of questions that come up about the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, of the Scripture, of the Bible. What does that mean? Did God say and dictate, and Moses sat down and wrote? Right? What does it mean to be inspired by the Holy Spirit? What does that mean? So all of these questions are coming into play. And if we don't know them, if we don't know the answers, if we have simple answers to difficult questions, then we find that they're not satisfying, they don't lead anywhere.
I added to Marina, I think I understand that she's talking about her Muslim friend, that she's very devoted to her fast and the way she dressed, the way she pray or something. But there's, in our faith, we do it for love, because we love God, and we do this because we love Him, we respect Him, we like actually to be in His image. For them, be scared of going to hell. That's why they do all this kind of stuff, just because they are scared from their God, that if they expose their hand, if they expose their face, their hair or something, oh, they will go to hell. That's the difference between us and them. But I don't want them to go and discuss this with their friend at school and talk about your religion is whatever, false or something. Just give them idea that we don't discuss this too much. Maybe they understand it, but they don't discuss it now.
The thing is, of course, like Tante is saying, it's very true that the way a Muslim views Allah and the way Christians view God is different. After all, we're not worshiping the same God. And the reason we discuss all of these things is not so we can go and throw this information in their face and say, you know what, haha, your God is not God. That's insensitive, right? And by the way, if you go and do that, what you're going to end up doing is that you're losing that person. And you might lose that person for Christ forever.
And making an enemy as well.
Right? And that's not the point. The point isn't to win arguments. The point isn't just to win debates. The point is to win the person. That's really the point, right? So when a person comes in and he's like, what's wrong with your religion? What's wrong with this thing? What's wrong with that thing? And then your first instinct is to start firing back with answers. And this is what that person said, and this is what the Bible says. And this is actually what's wrong with your religion, and so on. But this is your first instinct. But you should slow down, wait, and think that behind all these questions, that there is a real person with real feelings, and maybe he has real problems, and these problems are unanswered, okay? And he hasn't found these answers within his own faith, within his own religion. So if I start attacking his own religion, I'm not really giving him an answer to his problems. Okay? All I'm doing is creating more animosity between me and him, between the two religions. Right? But if I focus to what are his problems, what are his real questions, right? What is he struggling with, and go from there. It's very important that we all know what's going on, because people like to advertise or promote themselves a certain way to be accepted by others. But that might not be what's really happening. And it's important for us to know what's really happening in order for us to have well-informed opinions and decisions and so forth. But that doesn't mean that because now I know what the truth is that I become arrogant. St. Peter in his first epistle says, be prepared to give an answer to all those who ask you questions of the hope that is in you with gentleness, with meekness, and with fear. Fear of the Lord.
And for that, they will observe your behavior, the way you talk to them, the way you love them, the way you know, your actions. So they will get you curious to know who you are. What is your religion? How come you're so peaceful and so nice and so good, even you know we are different? And that's why you attract them more to you instead of being making
Any other questions?
Say, yeah. About the mathematics and what? Say it. This is the only chance we have.
Okay, sorry.
Open discussion.
Sorry.
Question.
Okay, Marvel is going to
Sure.
go ahead.
Okay,
Yes.
why do people say fear God?
So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Many verses in the Bible talk about the fear of the Lord. Okay. So your question is, are we afraid of God?
No, why are we afraid? You know, everybody's saying love God. He's like
That's right.
a friend.
And in the epistle of St. John, he says that those who love, there is no fear in them, right? Those who have been made perfect in love have no fear. So how can we say we love God and then we fear God? Fear is not in the sense we are afraid of Him.
Yeah, it's different between both.
There's a difference between that fear of Allah that a Muslim might have and what He will do to them versus the fear of God. Fear we understand it in Christianity as respect and reverence of God, not being afraid of God and His punishment. We know that God is love and God is loving, and not a punisher or a scorekeeper. He came down so that we wouldn't die.
Yeah, it's like your parents, you fear your parents, you respect them, you obey them, you don't actually afraid of them. Yeah, sometimes.
But I just want to say one more comment about your question. Our behavior is important. Our actions are very important. They will know us by our fruits. Okay? But it's important to understand that it's not just about the actions. Because you can find Muslims who act much better than us. Much better than Christians. Okay? So that doesn't mean that these guys are following the truth. Okay? Or much nicer, much kinder, much more polite. So it's important to understand that this is not just the end-all and be-all of Christianity. To be nice, to be polite, and to say thank you, and say please. Okay? And to say sorry when you make a mistake. This is not the end-all and be-all of Christianity. Okay? This is a common misunderstanding. Yes, we're called to show and to produce good fruits, but this is not it. Okay? There's so much, because a common question I get asked, you know what, I have friends who are not Christian, and they're much better than friends that I have inside the church. They're nicer, they're kinder to me, they don't gossip, they certainly don't judge. Okay? So why is it that I shouldn't go and be friends with them? Why is it that I shouldn't go and attend meetings with them in their place of worship? The people that are here, they're not nice. So we're not saying that, you know, not nice and not kind and not gentle, all that is not important. Okay? This is part of a whole. Okay, you had a question.
Why is it like Asian and like the science stuff and stuff?
Yes, so the science in ancient Egypt began, but it didn't continue. Okay? It began, but it didn't continue. In ancient Egypt, what they had was they had advancement in math, even in some stuff with astronomy. They were able to track some stars and calculate orbits. There's some inscriptions about their astronomical discoveries and things like that. But they weren't able to continue. They weren't able to keep that up because they believed that every part of nature has a God, and that God acts according to his own will or her own will. So why would I spend time researching how this object in space works? Because there's a God in there. Sometimes it's going to act one way, sometimes it's going to act a different way. So their faith affected their science.
I know, but like the people who were searching about the stars and stuff, they were Muslim in the time.
No, ancient Egypt, before them.
Before that, we didn't like.
Before them. before Islam came to Egypt, before the 6th century. We're talking BC. We're talking way before.
But how come they built the pyramids, and which it's like it's a miracle? How
Yes,
they built it
and
with
they're
the
very
pyramids.
smart in doing that.
Yeah.
How did they do it? And we still don't exactly know how they did it, especially that they didn't have tools, they didn't have machinery, they didn't have...
Angled the right, whatever.
Exactly. And all these stones are angled perfectly and built perfectly, right? How did they lift them up?
And the beam and the sun actually goes in there.
That's right. That's right. So you see how they were able to include, to incorporate astronomy into their structure, something that you don't see much of in other civilizations. They're very smart, but they couldn't keep it up. They couldn't continue.
It's because like the French people in England.
No, that's very, very contemporary. That's maybe, you're jumping maybe 1800 years. We're talking pharaohs,
London.
5,000.
Cleopatra.
right?
Yeah, that's
We're talking pharaohs. We're talking Cleopatra. We're talking Nefertiti. We're talking people, dynasties that are 2000 BC.
No, but like in that time,
Yeah.
is there like it was outside of
In that time, they didn't. Like all the modern problems you're speaking of, all these countries and these didn't exist. They had like other civilizations that they were at war with, but they were still very strong. In fact, Egypt was much bigger than it is today. Much bigger. Right? They had a kind of navy. They had like boats, ships, things like that. They were much bigger than they are today. They're very strong. What ended them wasn't that they were weak or that they were not smart. They were very strong and they were very smart. But they didn't have Christianity. Okay? All of these civilizations collapsed.
But isn't like the science and math came back after Jesus came to Egypt?
Sorry?
Isn't the science and math came back to Egypt after Egypt?
So modern science, okay, if you look back at when Christianity entered Egypt, at that time, St. Mark, when he came in, he found it very multicultural. Okay, so the religions of all different places, because it was kind of like a place of trade. Many different people from them, many different places came in. And then St. Mark had a very hard time finding someone who believes in God until he found a shoemaker and so forth. We know the story, right? And then, bit by bit, Christianity began to spread throughout Egypt. But for Christianity to have an impact on science, it took more years. It began with the school of Alexandria. They had the school that was not just theological. They taught other subjects. They taught math, they taught the sciences, they taught the philosophies. They didn't just teach theology. Okay, so it began, but it took a couple of hundred years. And then the church fathers, the era of the church fathers came, and there's so many writings. They started to focus on the era or the time of the councils and the heresies, attacks to the faith itself. Okay, which had some impact that it took away some effort from this to fighting the heresies. And a few hundred years later came Islam, right? And it kind of put a pause on the whole region. By that time, Christianity has spread so much in Europe that when Islam began to invade Europe, essentially, they invaded as far as Spain, and then they had the Crusades and all that stuff. They spent a lot of time fighting off Islam. So the scientific community at the time was very weak because of those external wars, as well as the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church at the time was very controlling. In fact, it was persecuting scientists. We're not talking about Christianity. We're talking about the Roman Catholic Church. It was you hear about the Galileo and Copernicus. Before Copernicus, they thought, okay, you know what? The Earth is the center of the universe. And he said, no, the sun is the center. But he didn't have a telescope to prove it. Galileo came with a telescope and said, oh, what he said is actually true. The sun doesn't revolve around the Earth. It's the other way around. The Earth revolves around the sun. You know how they took him, and there was a huge trial and imprisonment and exile and a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of scientists. They were persecuted, and that's why when the movement of the Enlightenment came, it found very fertile ground, because so many people hated the institutional church, the Roman Catholic Church, because it kind of gave no authority to anything else, any other institution, or any other enterprise or anything else outside of itself. The church was in control of everything. It would set the laws, it would set everything. The economy, the Roman Catholics would set everything. It controlled everything, right? It would install monarchs, kings, make people kings, take kings out of the throne and put someone else. It had that much power. So Egyptians, very smart, but they couldn't continue because of many different reasons. I gave you just some of them, but there's so many other reasons, right?
How about we do in school that algebra?
Yes.
An Arab person actually.
It did, and that's Islamic. Yes, exactly. And that's what I'm telling you. They're very smart, but they couldn't continue because of the random and arbitrary nature of Allah. Very smart, and had they continued, they would have continued with their scientific discoveries, but they didn't.
Science is conflict with their worship.
Absolutely.
What is the place of Mesopotamia exactly?
So Mesopotamia is between the two rivers, and the Euphrates, yes. Mabin al-Nahrain, yes, between the two rivers. The whole region is called Asia Minor, but specifically it's the area between the two rivers. Tigris and the Euphrates. Boys, we remember, what do we say? Respect.
So, in the new era now, for instance, like Japan, with all their smartness and the way that they're developing technology,
yes,
being them atheists, so they're not really following something
yes,
to relate to the religion. So how we can explain it?
So you have modern science taking place a few centuries ago in Europe, and after it started to migrate. You know, Japan a few decades ago, anything that you would find in a store that says "Made in Japan," that means it's something that's very low quality. They took it and put it back. Oh, it's made in Japan. Okay? Kind of like sometimes you go to the dollar store, oh, it's made in China, must be low quality. You know, they make good stuff, but some of the stuff you find say it's bad, oh, it's low quality. Japan, everything they made was bad. But after the war, they turned everything around. So they learned from all of these other countries. And because of their proximity to Europe, the scientific discoveries kind of migrated. Yes, their faith is not Christian. In fact, Shintoism is atheist, right? They don't believe in a God. But because of science in Europe, it migrated to every other place on Earth.
So it's just that they've used the same theories and they just evolved it.
Yes, exactly. So they took the same stuff and kept and furthered the development of it. But they didn't develop these theories themselves. They didn't certainly have the Christian mindset to see. They kind of borrowed that mindset. They borrowed these presuppositions and worked with them. Like for them, there's no reason why the world should be rational. There's no reason why the world should be discoverable. There's no reason. Materialism doesn't dictate that we have to know what's going on. That we have to understand or trust our minds that tell us what's going on. It doesn't dictate that. There's a presupposition in there that they just borrowed from Europe. Any other question? You guys have been very patient. Thank you very much. I will see you in a little bit.